before we start. I'm Adam Harris, a reporter of the Telegraph-Journal. I'm tonight's moderator. We'll review some of the ground rules before we begin our live taping that will create a level playing field for the candidates. We do not want to drown out any of the candidates as they answer a question, so please be courteous and do not interrupt the candidates when they're speaking or responding to questions. Keep applause to a minimum after a candidate has responded to a question. Excessive response will cut into the time allotted for the debate and reduce the number of questions that we're going to ask. Once the debate is started, we ask you that you not try to come in and out of the theater, if at all possible. The noise and the light changes will affect the television production. There'll be no questions from the floor tonight. Our panelists, Sean Barry and John Chillibeck, will pose the questions based on their journalistic research. And finally, anyone causing a disruption or interrupt a candidate will be removed and escorted from the auditorium. So let's just not do that. Okay. I'll play it here, David. Okay. We'll start with 5 and end with like 2 survivors. There'll be a red light. You just so those 3 will be yours. Just look into the red light. That one's mine. That one over there beside Chris is John and Sean's. There's a time clock there for you. I'm going to. Your mics are abruptly cut off as soon as the time ends. So, and then I'll also ask the next person to go. When we get into open discussion, I'm just going to say the floor is now open. I'm not going to point to a particular person. Jump in and try not to talk over one another. I'll try to steer the debate if you decide don't talk over each other. One more to go after this, I guess. Maybe. Good evening and welcome to the Telegraph Journal and Rogers TV presentation of the local campaign Leaders Debate. I'm your moderator, Adam Puris. We are at the Centre Communautaire St. Anne in Fredericton. In tonight's debate, we'll meet the leaders running in the upcoming 2014 provincial election on Monday, September 22nd. We'll ask them questions about current issues facing the province and hear their response and how they plan to take action on these issues if they are elected. The order of the leaders have been determined by a draw prior to coming to the stage. Joining me are the leaders: Green Party leader David Kuhn, Liberal leader Brian Gallant, Progressive Conservative leader David Alward, NDP leader Dominic Carty, and People's Alliance leader Chris Austin. Next, please welcome our panelists for this evening. It's Sean Barry and John Chilliback, both are provincial reporters for the Telegraph Journal. The rules of the debate are as follows. Each candidate will begin with a 30-second introductory opening statement. Then the first candidate will then be posed a question from one of our panelists. The candidates will have 60 seconds to respond. Each of the remaining candidates will also have 60 seconds to provide a rebuttal. After all candidates have commented, there will be a 90-second moderated discussion on the question. All candidates are encouraged to participate in that discussion, and I, as the moderator, will guide the discussion to the best of my ability. Tonight, we will attempt to ask as many questions as possible during this broadcast. When necessary, we will shorten or extend the time allotted for the moderated debate to help fit the hour-long time allotment. As we near the end of the debate, candidates will be asked to give their closing statement. The closing statements will be delivered in reverse order of the opening statements. Each candidate will be given 1 minute for their statements. First, we begin with Green Party leader David Kuhn and his opening comments. David?
Thank you, Adam, and good evening. This election is about what kind of New Brunswick we want. Worldwide, people are embracing new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things to address our greatest problems: poverty, homelessness, insecurity, the growing ecological decline, and climate change. We can and must do this too in New Brunswick. The Green Party's vision is one of sustainability. We're communities that provide fulfilling lives for everyone, and an economy that works with and not
Mr.
against.
Gallant, your turn.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to the other leaders for being here tonight. I love this province. We are very blessed here. Unfortunately, our potential is being squandered under the David Alward Conservatives. David Alward is the first premier in 40 years to not create jobs. Most of this is to blame because of his reckless cuts to our social programs. A Liberal government will prioritize job creation. We will balance the books within 6 years, and this will allow us to invest in education, health care, and senior care.
Mr. Alward.
Good evening. Tonight I will speak to you about our jobs plan to safely develop our natural resources and bring our people home. Brian Gallant is proposing another way, to follow Sean Graham's playbook of tax, borrow, and spend, and leave a $2.8 billion bill for our children to pay. We can't go on breaking up our families and communities while people are leaving for work. As you watch tonight, I ask that you think about your family and say yes to a brighter future.
Mr. Carty.
You tuned in tonight looking for answers. And I'm going to give you some straight answers. Mr. Albert's going to talk about fracking. Mr. Gallant's going to talk about borrowing money that we don't have. The new NDP is the right choice for voters who've lost faith in the Liberal and Conservative parties. We're offering fiscal discipline, social progress, balanced books, jobs created by a strong private sector supported by the best public services in Canada. Tonight, I'm going to talk about how we can face and overcome our province's challenges together because New Brunswick deserves better.
Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Adam. Good evening, fellow New Brunswickers. I wanted to say that I appreciate you taking the time to watch this tonight and become an informed voter. There's no question our province is facing intense challenges that we've never faced before. We have a $12 billion debt, our young people going out west to work, and quite frankly, it all falls squarely on the shoulders of Liberal and Conservative governments in the past. There's no question we have to change. Tonight, I hope to persuade you through our policies we're out to change things.
Sean Berry will now ask the first question to Mr. Kuhn.
Good evening. Thousands of New Brunswickers have left the province for work. Some 43,000 others were reported to be unemployed last month. How would your plan get more people working here?
Well, it's interesting, you know, Sean, 88% of community college graduates are working in New Brunswick, 88%. So there's a different story than just the one you read in the newspapers all the time. But our plan would create green jobs for New Brunswickers in supplying local food, developing our local renewable energy resources, in renovating and building new green buildings and energy efficient homes, and producing more of what we need at home here, and using our resources sustainably and fairly, and in really taking advantage of the green technologies and processes that are being developed in our universities that should be commercialized in New Brunswick to create jobs here. So that's key. We've got to ensure that we stop exporting raw materials out of the province, like logs that the provincial cabinet recently permitted to go out of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. That's just shipping the jobs away rather than keeping them here. So fundamentally, we need to capture the wealth that we're already creating, holding it in our communities, and creating new wealth in our local communities.
Mr. Gallant, 1 minute.
Thank you for the question, Sean. We have to help our families who find life a lot less affordable under the Alward Conservatives. We have to give opportunity to our young people to stay here, and that's why a Liberal government will focus and prioritize job creation. We have a plan to invest in a youth employment fund. We have a plan to help small businesses who need more support. We have a plan to support 4 important energy projects like the Sissenbrook Mine and the Energy East Pipeline. And we have a plan to invest in our infrastructure. This will create 1,700 jobs in the short term. In the long term, it will help us foster economic growth. And the Auditor General has made it very clear. We can either invest in our roads and infrastructure now, or we're going to have to pay 5 to 6 times more later. And on top of that, the Auditor General has made it very clear. We need our roads and bridges to be safe. And that's why we believe with stimulating the economy with this investment is not only the right thing to do for our economy, it's the right thing to do to keep New Brunswickers safe.
Mr. Alward, 1 minute.
You know, if you were to ask New Brunswickers right across the province, there's hardly a New Brunswicker who doesn't have a family member, a son and daughter, or a neighbor who is working outside of our province in the very same sectors that we have an opportunity to build here in New Brunswick. We are the only party that is saying yes to developing our natural resources, including shale gas, creating $10 billion of private sector investment, real investment in New Brunswick, which will create thousands of jobs, not only in construction projects, but very importantly, allowing our contracting companies to be more competitive, allowing our industries like ICT to work for gas and oil companies, allowing our engineering companies, our smart people to go back to work in New Brunswick instead of having to leave the province. As a province, we can do better. We don't have to force our young people to leave our province to work someplace else.
Mr. Cardy, 1 minute.
So the new NDP is being really clear on this. We're saying the answer, it's not fracking, it's not borrowing money we don't have, it's trusting New Brunswickers. So we want to get rid of the small business tax to unleash that potential in that economic sector. We want to create a new jobs tax credit. That's a tax credit that will reward employers who actually create work, not people who promise to create work, not people with connections to governing political parties, but people who actually create the jobs. It's a hassle-free, bureaucratic-free, political-free, politics-free way of creating jobs in New Brunswick. It's been used in the States. It's created tens of thousands, not millions of jobs, and that's a statistic backed up by economists. We want government to be focusing on what government should be doing, which is looking after healthcare, looking after education, looking after critical infrastructure. We've got to let the private sector take care of creating jobs, something that both Mr. Allred and Mr. Glant have previously expressed a commitment to, but come election time, they go back to the same old way of thinking, trying to buy jobs with your tax dollar. It doesn't work, and the new NDP will put a stop to that way of doing things.
Mr. Austin, 1 minute.
Did you know that last year alone, you as taxpayers, myself, we gave $109 million to big corporate interest in the form of subsidies, forgivable loans, and grants. Matter of fact, over the last 2 terms of the Conservative and Liberal governments, us as taxpayers gave out almost $1 billion to big corporate interest. All the while, our young people continue to move out west, our families are split apart, small and medium-sized businesses continue to struggle. It amazes me the insanity of these 2 parties of doing the same things over and over and expecting some type of different outcome. The People's Alliance firmly believes that if we eliminate big corporate subsidies, forgivable loans and grants, take a portion of that, reinvest it in small and medium-sized business, some initiative for entrepreneurs to come to New Brunswick and set up shop, that we can truly turn the tide for our economy in New Brunswick and give our children a future here at home.
We now have a 90-second open discussion. The floor is now open.
Mr. Allred, I have to ask you, Mr. Allred, you keep asking New Brunswickers to say yes. Does that mean that they have to say yes to continued job losses that they've seen under your government? Does that mean that they have to say yes to Stephen Harper's EI changes? Does that mean that they have to say yes to the worst economic growth year after year that we've seen under your government?
Mr. Gallant, if big tax dollars would have saved jobs in New Brunswick in 2010 when your previous premier was spending the most money in capital budget history in New Brunswick, you lost 7,000 jobs. Your plan for the future is false. It will not create jobs. All it will do is put money from people's wallets into long-term debt of the province.
You know, Mr. Glant, you talk about infrastructure in New Brunswick, $900 million. I wonder about bridges built in the Northwest Territories with APCON money that your party gave out just a few years ago when you were in government. Let's build infrastructure here indeed, but it seems like the Liberal Party is much more concerned with rewarding their friends and buddies.
We've been very clear
$80 million because it was done
been very clear, Mr. Lance, about the need to take
10
politics.
premiers asking us to invest in infrastructure as a nation.
We cannot afford it.
Go ahead, Mr. Cardy.
I'm sorry.
The new NDP was really clear we need to take the politics out of road construction, get rid of the ministerial allocation that allows politics to interfere in road projects, that leaves Route 11 going through your constituency and others into the hands of politicians.
That's the end of open debate. We'll now move to a second question. That question will come from John Tillbeck. It'll be directed towards Mr. Glant.
The development of natural resources has been a galvanizing issue in this province. How would you address the shale gas industry and its further development and the development of the Energy East pipeline?
Thank you for the question, John. It's very important that we find as many jobs as we can for New Brunswickers, that we foster economic development, and that's why that will be the priority of the Liberal government. But we need to do this in a very sustainable way. We have to do this in a responsible way. So developing our natural resources would play a crucial role in a Liberal government, but it would be done responsibly. And that's why our position has been very clear over the last 3 years that there would be a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing until we fully understand the risk to our water, our environment, and our health. Now, we have said yes, to borrow the line of Mr. Albert, to many other projects that we think we can do in a responsible way, such as the LNG terminal conversion to an export facility, the construction of an oil export facility in St. John, the Sissenbrook mine, and many other mining projects, and the Energy East pipeline. And we will do everything we can as a Liberal government to make sure it's done safely, but to ensure that it makes its way to New Brunswick, and it makes its way to St. John, and that we are prepared as a province.
Mr. Albert, 1 minute.
We've been very clear since the last election. We support the responsible development of natural gas in New Brunswick, including shale. And we have taken 2 years to build the strongest regulatory system to protect water, to protect communities, to protect people. But you know something? The opportunities that we have in New Brunswick today are being done by New Brunswickers someplace else in Canada or down in the United States. Technology that's being developed in New Brunswick doesn't able to benefit New Brunswick opportunities or jobs here today because we haven't been able to say yes to those opportunities. So we want to move forward with shale gas development. And you know something? How can you move forward with an LNG project? Who is going to invest $3 billion if you don't have access to that natural resource? Who is going to support a pipeline from Alberta if they don't support frack wells? Because 85% of oil and gas development in Canada is frack.
Mr. Carty, 1 minute.
The new NDP is really clear on resource development, that what we need to do is to try and, again, limit the power of politicians to, come election time, turn natural resource projects into efforts to buy votes. The Liberals did it in 2009 and 10 before the last election when they signed the leases to allow the shale gas industry into the province, and the Conservatives have been doing similarly this time with pursuit of shale gas, despite the fact that in the province's own estimates, there are no indications of any revenues at all from the shale gas industry for the next couple of years. So the promises of jobs and profits seem somewhat illusory. So what the NDP wants to do is to create an arm's length human health and environmental protection agency. And that will be responsible for looking at every single natural resource project and deciding whether it was in New Brunswick's best interests, both from the point of view of human health and environmental safety, and then as well to make sure that it's a project that would bring a profit for the people of the province. That sort of process of getting the politics out, making sure that we make decisions based on science and facts, it's been tried in other jurisdictions, and UNDP will do it here.
Mr. Austin, 1 minute.
The People's Alliance firmly believes that we must not allow political parties to determine the future of shale gas development. We believe that it's very important that you as taxpayers, you as voters, you as residents in New Brunswick have a direct say in the future of shale gas. As such, we are the only party that believes in a referendum. You deserve to have the say. It's yours. Did you also know that in 2012, you and I as taxpayers paid $32 million to have Crown wood taken off of our land? Rather than receiving money for the Crown wood that we're giving to industry, we paid to have it removed. Private woodlot owners are struggling. 41,000 of you with private woodlots are struggling to be able to sell your wood. Some of you have it as your retirement plan. Some of you have it as a nest egg, but yet it's being squandered by these governments that continue to leave you hanging out in the cold in the help of
Mr. Cooper, 1 minute.
The Green Party is the only party that recognizes we're facing a climate calamity. That our moral imperative, our responsibility to our kids is to reduce our use of fossil fuels and increase our dependence on energy efficiency and renewable energy. Those are sunset industries. That's where the new jobs are, and that's our responsibility. You can't suck and blow at the same time. You can't fight climate change and get greenhouse gas emissions down, cut that carbon pollution, and at the same time increase your production of fossil fuels, whether it's through fracking, which is dangerous and unacceptable, or whether it's through building a pipeline from the tar sands, which is only going to significantly expand the carbon footprint of the tar sands. We can't do either of those things. What we need to do is look towards the sunrise industries, which are all about making our houses green, our buildings efficient, and harnessing the power of our renewable energy and renewable fuels that are plentiful in this province. That's where the jobs are, that's where the future lies, and that's where the business opportunities lay for New Brunswick.
90-second open discussion. The floor is now open.
I can ask you a question. That one of the problems that I have when we talk about the pursuit of the shale gas industry is the Waterways Protection Act, an act introduced, systemically ignored by Liberal and Conservative governments. Every single application made to protect a waterway under that legislation, it didn't actually meet, it never got the ministerial approval that it needed. So when I think a lot of people hear about your plans for developing shale gas, they're concerned. We support the Energy's pipeline, starts at point A, goes to point B, reasonably established technology. When it comes to a shale gas industry with thousands of wells scattered potentially across our province, I think people worry because we've seen that, for example, Windsor Energy, a company that you said was going to be credit to the industry in New Brunswick, all it's given us is an over $100 million lawsuit lodged against your government. It's not just a problem with natural resources, it's a problem with governments and with your government and the way you've handled this file.
Mr. Glenn, I have a question I'd like to ask to you.
I'd certainly be prepared. Actually, you look at the regulatory system for shale gas development and the treatment of water, they are the strongest treatments in North America. There is no question.
With all due respect, gentlemen, I actually know a lot about this because I've worked in the environmental field for 30 years, so I understand environmental regulations pretty well. And previously, you just adopted what the Liberals proposed, which was to put guidelines into our environmental system.
Mr. Glenn, I would like to know your moratorium. Mr. Glenn, your moratorium
is actually protect our
Mr. Glenn, your moratorium on fracking wells.
I will now go to Sean Barry for the next question. Sean, you'll direct the question to Mr. Allward.
New Brunswick's debt is set to hit $12.2 billion this year. Every party in this election is planning to add more to the deficit or more to the debt before balancing the province's books. Why are you taking the fiscal approach you are?
And thank you for the question. And actually, as a government, we have a strategy in place to be able to get back to balanced books by 2017-18. Our platform itself is fiscally responsible. A total of $117 million in new spending, more than half of that through the prescription drug program to benefit the most vulnerable New Brunswickers. What we have continued, we have systematically been able to reduce spending across government and do that in a responsible way. 0.7% spending across government each year over the last 4 years in relationship to 6% spending on average by the former Liberal government. We have a plan in place. We are focused on getting that plan done. Most importantly, though, we have to grow the economy. That's why we need to have our people working here with real private sector investment, driving revenues up, so ultimately we...
Mr. Carty, 1 minute.
So that's actually, Mr. Barry, in response to your question, that's not actually correct. The NDP is proposing in its first year to reduce spending by over $200 million with only $30 million of additional spending. We're the only party that's got a concrete plan to immediately take a chunk out of the provincial debt. $1.1 billion from an income trust based on the future earnings of NB Liquor. Not the most exciting sounding policy in the world, but it'll knock 10% off the interest payments that today make up the 4th largest expenditure line in our provincial government. Only health, education, and the social development cost us more each year. We've got to stop paying money to banks outside of New Brunswick and invest those savings first in getting the books balanced, then in making investments in the education and healthcare systems that will help us create jobs by encouraging the private sector to generate new jobs, generate profits, pay their taxes, and allow us to reinvest those back into an excellent public service. So those are the sort of approaches we're taking. We'll balance the books in our first term, aggressively work on working down the debt, make ourselves debt-free.
Mr. Austin, 1 minute.
You know, it amazes me that when we look at the past history again of the two parties, that here in the last 4 years, Mr. Allward's government added $2.7 billion to the debt. Before that, big spending Liberals, Sean Graham, added $2.9 billion to the provincial debt. What we are saying as a party is we've got to get back to basic government. The reason why our roads are not being properly plowed in the wintertime in rural areas and not being paved in the summertime is because these decisions of past governments have left us all but broke. We believe that if you scale back corporate subsidies, reinvest in small and medium-sized business, give the little guy a fair shake in the marketplace, give him a chance or her a chance to build up a vibrant economy and business here here in New Brunswick. I believe we can turn this province around. The People's Alliance has some great plans to bring about fiscal responsibility and do it the right way.
Mr. Coon?
I don't think the solution is to do what the new NDP is suggesting, which is to slash more people from the public service. The public service has been cut to the bone. Ask a nurse, ask a teacher, ask a doctor. We've got to live within our means, no question, but we don't have to live in fear. We have the means to put the deficit behind us, but it means making choices. So it's important that everyone pays their fair share. We've got to stop giving away our resources, our timber, our potash, our minerals, and our conventional natural gas. We're just giving those resources away and not getting the fair return we should be getting. We've got to start ensuring that wealthy corporations don't continue to avoid paying their fair share of taxation, so we should bring them up to the same level of taxation as Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And we've got to we would put, the Green Party, a tax on pollution, which would help eliminate the structural component of our deficit, raising $164 million a year. Mr. Gallant and maybe Mr. Allward, if he regained.
Mr. Gallant, 1 minute, please.
We have to get our finances in order so we can make sure that we sustain and even improve the important social programs that are so important to New Brunswickers. Unfortunately, David Allward doesn't get it. He doesn't understand what the Conference Board of Canada has told us. His reckless cuts have actually depressed the economy further. He doesn't have a plan to balance the books. If he had a plan, he would have done it in 4 years like he promised. Unfortunately, under the Allward government, with their fourth budget, they are actually going to be the government that has added the most to our debt in the province's history. We have a plan. We are going to create jobs. We are going to balance the books within 6 years. And with our plan, with every dollar that we spend, there's going to be $1.34 in savings or in new revenue. Now that's a plan that will move New Brunswick forward. That's a plan that will be fair, balanced, and targeted. And that's a plan that will have us have a financial situation that is healthy and people working in our province.
From the party, you're blaming us for taking longer to clean up the mess that you left New Brunswick. And you still haven't even begun to demonstrate how you're realistically going to grow the economy. You're going to continue to add debt to the province through an infrastructure program that we cannot afford. Every cent that you're going to be spending on that infrastructure program is coming from taxpayers' credit cards. It is irresponsible. It is completely unnecessary. Your plan is not real.
Mr. Premier, you are the Premier that has added the most to the debt in our province's history. You are the only Premier. If you don't mind, Mr. Premier, excuse me, Mr. Premier, excuse me, Mr. Premier, I let you speak. You are the only Premier in 40 years that did not create jobs. That is why you were unable to balance the books, because you didn't raise revenue. You chose reckless cuts that depressed the economy further. Look at what the economists are saying, Mr. Allward. That's what happened to our province.
We'll now go to John Chillibeck for a question for Mr. Carter.
How do you respond to suggestions the province is violating the Canada Health Act when it comes to access to abortion services?
I say that I agree, and I say that an NDP government on its first day in office, the Health Minister will repeal Regulation 8420, restricting a woman's right to access to reproductive health services.
Good question. I think it's important to understand that there's two things that the Supreme Court ruled on that every province must abide by. Number one, women have a right to choose. Number two, the province is obligated to provide access. What the Supreme Court did not rule on is funding. What I believe is that abortions that are medically necessary are funded. Abortions that are not medically necessary should not be funded. That's my position.
Mr. Coon, you now have 1 minute.
Absolutely, we have to eliminate this crazy rule that requires a woman to ask permission from 2 doctors. This is 2014. It runs contrary certainly to the spirit of the Canada Health Act and the Supreme Court decision. Whether it's a letter of the law, we'll leave that to the lawyers to decide. So we would completely remove those regulations, but we would go further and say we want to remove the regulations that say abortion services can only be provided in hospitals and move them into clinics, funded as part of our health system, as part of Vitalité, and as part of Horizon, so that women can get the kind of compassionate, non-judgmental counseling and care and aftercare they deserve in such a traumatic situation. Hospitals aren't the right place. We need to have clinics in this province for women who are seeking reproductive health services and abortions.
Well, I agree with the statement. Unfortunately, as a province, New Brunswick is not respecting a woman's right to choose. We've made it very clear that a Liberal government will act swiftly to find the barriers and eliminate them. We want to ensure that a woman's right to choose is being respected. Unfortunately, under the All-Work Conservatives, that hasn't been the case. We can't let personal beliefs get in the way. As a Premier, you can't cherry-pick which laws and which findings from the Supreme Court of Canada you want to follow and which ones you don't want to follow. So Liberal government will act swiftly. We'll ensure that we find all barriers. Now, one thing I want to make very clear, Dominic Cardy does like the line of repealing 8420. I know what he's trying to say, but instead of looking for the clip, we should be talking about this sensitive issue in the right way. Regulation 8420 is the regulation that sets up all of our Medicare system. It is 44 pages long. I think Mr. Cardy is referring to page 37, where there's a paragraph that talks about the two-doctor rule. We cannot be looking for clips on this. We have to have a mature discussion.
Mr. Albert.
Has followed similar program as governments before, whether that be the McKenna government, whether that be the Ontario government, Lord Graham, and ourselves, where we do provide public access to medically necessary abortions, and we will continue to do that.
So, Mr. You've shown that you're able to read Regulation 8420. That's great.
More than you, Mr. Cardy.
No, I've read it many times. And I've talked about it with women's groups who continue to repeat their support for the position that we clearly took. And you don't need to identify the barriers to access. The barriers to access have been identified. So are you willing today to commit here that on that page, in that paragraph that you identified, that you will specifically remove that barrier to access? Yes or no? It's a straightforward question.
Mr. Cardy, the reproductive justice.
Yes
New Brunswick,
or
just
no?
a second, Mr. Cardy.
It's a yes or no question.
You asked the question, I'm going to answer it. The reproductive justice of New Brunswick have asked for a comprehensive review, as has the Medical Society. And one thing that's really unfortunate, Mr. Cardy,
Is that
there
you
are
don't answer
three
questions,
people.
Mr.
There are
Cardy,
three
on this
people.
or any other subject.
There are three people on this stage. There are three people on this stage, Mr. Cardy, that think that the status quo is not okay. There are two that don't. But yet you choose to take the time
Bill
to
Fraser
attack
here.
me, Mr. Cardy.
question
Unfortunately,
I would
why would you not be talking to the current Premier who thinks the status quo is okay? Because
Mr.
Chris
Glenn,
Austin who thinks that the status quo is okay.
Mr. Glenn,
We should not be politicizing
Mr.
this
Glenn, are
issue.
you going to follow the federal Liberal mandate and make your candidates be pro-choice?
No. So, Mr. Cardy, I think it's very important that we not politicize this issue. And unfortunately, there are two people.
There are here to take difficult stands on difficult issues. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be here on the stage.
Which I have done,
Changed your
Mr.
position?
Cardy.
Have you changed your position? Because I remember seeing you on video being very adamant with Mr. Trudeau that indeed your candidates do have to be pro-choice.
We'll now go to Sean Barry for a question to Mr. Austin.
The cohort of working age New Brunswickers is getting smaller. How would you encourage population growth in this province and immigration to New Brunswick?
Good question, thank you, Sean. I think it's important that in order to bring people into the province has to be vibrant. We have to have an economy that works for everybody, not just an elite few. We have to have diversity in our cultures and our ability to do business here in New Brunswick. As such, a People's Alliance government would work very hard to deregulate the business atmosphere here in the province, to make sure that it's easier for people that have a vision, that have passion, that want to start up a business here in the province, that can do so without jumping over unnecessary hurdles and red tape. By deregulating the business in New Brunswick, we believe that will bring in new entrepreneurs, new investment, and new people to this great province.
Mr. Pearson, 1 minute.
We have an amazing province, and when people hear about it, it almost sells itself. It's a great place to come. Newcomers are excited to be here and discover many times they will stay without really planning that at the outset where they intended to go somewhere else. What we need to do, I think, is ensure that New Brunswick becomes a place that people want to come to. The Green Party wants it to become a beacon of sustainability, kind of the Vermont of Canada. And in doing so, I think both immigrants and young families who are planning on having children will come to New Brunswick, settle here if they feel that this is a place where there's a real future that's getting in the track to move towards sustainability for a greener future in line with what we need to do in the 21st century, rather than looking backwards to the old days of fossil fuel development and fracking and tar sands.
Mr. Delant, 1 minute.
I agree with Mr. Kuhn when he says that we have a beautiful province. We have so much to offer. One of the interesting things is that when young people have the choice of where to study, either university or college, they often choose our beautiful province. When people have the choice of where to retire, they often choose our beautiful province. But what we have to do is give people in the middle, people who are of the working age, people who are raising their families, the chance to be here, have opportunity, and that's why we would focus on job creation, growing the economy. But our second priority will also be a family plan, helping the families that are trying to make ends meet. That's why we would raise the minimum wage. That's why we would include more spaces for daycare. That's why we would help low-income people when it comes to daycare assistance. That's why we would help our seniors stay in their homes longer by offering them tax credits, even offering tax credits to families that are keeping seniors in their homes longer as well. We would also ensure that we continuously study the status of women so that they can raise families and that they can help be in the workforce and work with their partner to make sure.
Mr. Allward, 1 minute.
You know, the best way to grow our economy and our province is through jobs. It's through opportunities for families to set roots in their communities. Young people, instead of being educated here in New Brunswick and educated for a job in Alberta, educate them for a great job in here in our province. You know, there's a reason why Alberta is renovating or building 120 new schools a year. It's because families are moving to Alberta because of the work. And we have the very same opportunity here in New Brunswick to develop our resources in a responsible way, to create real jobs, great paying jobs for all sorts of sector, our tradespeople, but very importantly, engineers. Instead of seeing classes of engineers moving away from University of Moncton or University of New Brunswick to the west, they need opportunities here. Our IT professionals need opportunities here. We need a chance to work with our students who come from away to have jobs here and be able to stay in New Brunswick. Jobs.
Mr. Carty, your turn.
The question was about immigration, right? Okay. Growing our population to me means immigration at this point, unless we're actually going to go out and ask people to have more babies, which I don't think any of us out here at this point are suggesting. And the way in which a new NDP government would encourage immigration is by sitting down with the federal government and negotiating a new immigration deal. Other Canadian provinces have managed to reach different accommodations with Ottawa to have different degrees of control over immigration, so that we don't see what has happened, which is folks come to the province and often use us as a stepping stone to go further out west. So we want to see if we can put more controls in place so that we can have more influence over the way that our immigration system works, through the provincial nominee program and other tools that are out there. But part of it's also got to be taking the politics out of the way New Brunswick is run. I talked to too many business people who tried to set up shop in New Brunswick, and because they didn't know the right people, didn't come from the right family, they decided to move on to places that were easier to make money. That's the sort of thing a new NDP government will put a stop to, will grow our population.
Open discussion.
Mr. Carney, I just want to tell you that I agree. I think that we do have to, as a province, and I would even argue as an Atlantic region, ask the federal government to play a larger role, allow us to play a larger role when it comes to immigration.
And that's the reality is we've already begun that work collectively, not only as Atlantic provinces, but all of Canadian provinces. The reality, we need to be able to bring more newcomers to our country that have great skills, that have the desire, the passion to be here, to be part of our economy and to grow our opportunities. But we need to have strong, absolutely.
Because the political problem is a real obstacle. I've talked to business people who tried to set up
communities, and so if we,
because they didn't have the right connection.
If we look at what we're doing here as an example in Fredericton, with the Multicultural Center, which really is a stop shop for opportunities for the multicultures that we have represented in here. We've grown much as New Brunswickers. We need to continue to grow as a province. Our bilingual nature as a province brings incredible opportunity as well.
We haven't had that success so far, and part of it is because we really have lost out on the political side. But I've talked to business people since the first day.
I'd like to know the name of one, because the reality is
let's
now
sit down and talk about it. Because those folks
would
are
love
telling
to.
you that politics is stopping them from investing.
Yeah, and
they're going elsewhere in Canada, or they've left the country. So we've got to make sure.
We'd love to hear that, because
Judge Novak has a question for Mr. Kuhn.
We have the second grayest population in Canada. The median age is 44. Actually, I'm almost that age. And what does this mean for affordable senior care? How can we continue to afford what seniors need?
Well, Certainly, our aging population is posing a tremendous issue for our healthcare system in particular. And what Green Party would do is work with the other maritime provinces and Quebec to negotiate a new deal under the Canada Health Transfer. The federal government transfers money to support healthcare across the country, but it's not adjusted in any way for the particular needs of the region. And in our case, in our region, throughout the Maritimes, Newfoundland, and Quebec, we've got an aging population which increases healthcare costs significantly in the following years of life. So we need an adjustment on the healthcare transfer from Ottawa to recognize that. It's just a question of fairness as being part of this confederation. And increasingly under the Harper government, I think we're all feeling like we're islands floating in a bubble over the country where each province is on its own, left to its own devices. So let's pull together as Canadians again for a change and do what's fair and equitable. Mr. Lay?
I agree with Mr. Cooney. He's absolutely right when he says that there's a problem with Stephen Harper's changes to our health transfers, and unfortunately, as Premier David Alward said, nothing. In fact, the Minister of Health federally said that no minister actually went to go complain about the transfers that were being changed by Stephen Harper, which is very unfortunate. And I agree that because we're the second aging population, the most aging population in the country, we should be using that as a statistic instead of using our population. But to help our seniors, we have to realize that we need to give them the ability to retire with dignity and respect. Unfortunately, under the Albright Conservatives, too many families are struggling. That's why I'm so proud of the tax credits we want to give to seniors and their families so that seniors can stay in their homes longer, stay in the communities that they helped build longer. When I was young, my family moved in with my grandparents. My mother took care of my grandparents. So I know how much that type of tax credit can help, and I know how much having that family together makes a difference.
Before I begin, I correct Mr. Gallant, he's completely wrong. I certainly stood up along with every other premier across the country on the issues of going to a per capita system for healthcare, without a doubt. But you know something else that's going on? The reality is every Canadian premier is working to say that there does need to be a seniors or an aging index in terms of funding across the country because there are significant impacts. But you know something? New Brunswick, we're well ahead of the work that we're doing. We are aging more quickly, but we've begun work 4 years ago with people like Dr. John McLaughlin and the various organizations that work with our seniors to come forward with a program called Home First, where our seniors can live safely in their homes, be able to stay in their communities longer, support it with their families, with their friends, live vibrantly. We've begun this work this year. We're moving forward. Mr. Cardi?
So the new NDP approach to healthcare, and this of course includes seniors, but everyone else in the province too, is we need to move towards a primary care system. So moving away from care provided solely in hospitals and towards more community-based health centers that include not just doctors, but licensed practical nurses, RN, other health professionals. That'll make it much easier for our seniors to stay in their homes longer if we can work to expand our extramural programs and home visits, which is part of the reason the NDP has supported the advanced paramedics certification system, so that paramedics, who often say that they're left with little to do in between calls, can go and help to provide extra support for seniors who only may need a few minutes every day to stay in their homes for many years longer. So we want to try and move as well to further professionalize some of the home care centers. That too many home care workers are ending up being underpaid. We need to bump those salaries up so that they can provide the care to our seniors. After all the work they put in to build this province, they deserve our respect and our care. And after all, they paid the taxes to build the system that we live with.
Mr. Ross?
Right now, today, there are over 300 seniors living in hospitals. They're not sick. They don't need the medical attention that hospitals provide. But because of mismanagement of Liberal and Conservative governments, they have nowhere else to put them. This is a travesty on our province. It is an absolute shame that those who have paid taxes, that have worked to build this province for so many years, are treated in such an undignified way. I can tell you right now, a People's Alliance will push very strongly to make sure that our seniors are cared for. We will fight to make sure our home support workers, who are paid low wages compared to the rest of Canada, any other jurisdiction, get the increase that they deserve for the job that they do. I believe we have got to get back to looking after our seniors, and it has to be a top priority. The People's Alliance will fight just for that.
90-second open discussion.
So Mr. Coon, if I could just start with, because you made a reference earlier to my position on frontline workers. The NDP has been very clear that we do not plan cuts to frontline workers. We plan to eliminate corporate welfare, to reduce the size of government from 17 down to 10 departments, to streamline the way government works. So I just wanted to make sure that's in context when we talk here about the way we'd like to work on the healthcare system, where I think we all have a lot in common. That there's probably 80% of the things in this province are things where all the parties can actually get together and agree. We all have different ideas. For example, Mr. Gallant, give you credit for your idea of extending eye care for very young children, making sure they've got glasses and vision care. The prescription drug plan. It was certainly not supposed to be a two-phase program creating all the confusion and uncertainty that it is today, Mr. Walker, but at the same time we recognize the need to move ahead with a drug plan that does give protection for New Brunswickers facing catastrophic illness.
Speaking of drug plan, let's bring up the drug plan.
Of the medical system when Tommy Douglas invented it.
Let's bring up the drug plan. See that all parties here support the mandatory part of the drug plan, which, by the way, every single New Brunswicker who does not currently have a drug plan is going to be forced to pay a minimum of $67 a month for a prescription drug plan that they don't necessarily want, maybe don't need, should be their choice. But that is being shoved down their throats, and every single one of you support that mandatory drug plan.
We're talking about
the reason why people support a universal drug plan is the same reason why they support universal health care.
No, it's not the same.
Oh, absolutely.
Listen, there are drug plans out there, there's Blue Cross.
Sean Berry now has another question for Mr. Gallant.
New Brunswick has the lowest literacy rate in the country. How do we improve the situation?
It's a phenomenal question, Sean, and that's one that we have to address. Having the worst literacy rates in the country under the all-work Conservatives is something that we should all be very focused on and something that we should all want to correct. One of the best ways to give opportunity to every individual in our province is by having a strong education system. And one of the most important components of a strong education system is ensuring that we give everyone the opportunity to be able to read and write. That's why we're going to be very, very focused on this if we form government. Not only will we have a 10-year education plan that we will be willing to develop not only with stakeholders, teachers, professors, administrators, the students themselves, but we also want to include other political parties. This will ensure that if there's a change in government, the 10-year plan can continue to run its course. When it comes to literacy, we need to invest in our young people. If someone can't read by the end of grade 3, they're going to be lost potentially in the system forever. We have to focus on making sure that's better, and we also have to invest in adult literacy as well. Mr. Howard?
You know, Mr. Gallant's trying to say that this has been an issue that just begun over the last 4 years. The reality, I just was at a Literacy Coalition of New Brunswick fundraiser where Frank McKenna was the speaker, and he said one of his greatest frustrations when he finished his work was the literacy rate had remained where it was. We all face a huge travesty for our young people. We have made changes beginning back in 2005, focus on ensuring that children before the end of grade 2 are reading at grade level. That is work that's begun. Our children are going through the system. There are real changes taking place. On numeracy as well, there is focus on numeracy. We need to continue that work. We need to do more work with early childhood development because we know that the earlier we're able to reach our children, the more opportunity they're going to have. But you know something, a lot of it comes back to economy and parents who have great jobs, have good educations, have opportunities to well educate their children as well. So it's a society.
Mr. Carney,
we're all working together.
Dealing with this crisis of low literacy in our province is exactly why I got into politics. And the NDP has got a number of concrete suggestions on how we can deal with this. First, one of our 4 main targets for our first mandate is to get the literacy rate in our schools up above 90%. That has to be something that government puts a real emphasis on. We want to try as well to work with younger kids by creating a universally accessible, high quality and affordable early childhood education system where those basics, those fundamentals of reading and writing can be given to kids at the youngest possible age. We want to deal with the reality of a no-fail system where kids are often promoted without regard to their levels of achievement, and replace that with personalized learning plans so that every kid can learn to his or her level as quickly or as slowly with as much individual attention as possible. This is what government should be doing, focusing on education. Mr. Gallant, you're talking about 10-year plans. You've got 80 reviews in your platform. You've got 18 months just to decide what you were going to do. You're saying you're going to need 18 months in a spending review before you take any decisions. We don't have time.
Mr. Austin?
I believe it's very important and critical that we take the politics out of education. I've talked to many teachers that have felt the frustration of just getting a mandate going with their curriculum and their policies, and all of a sudden a new government comes in and changes it all up. Extremely frustrating and extremely hard to manage. I believe that could be very well a direct result of our high literacy rates here in the province. People's Alliance believe we have to reinvest in education. Matter of fact, although we have a very high debt and deficit,